The Saturday morning sun hit Marcus Chen's face as he stood in his kitchen, watching his daughter Jade set the table for their weekly breakfast ritual. At 16, she'd grown tall enough that he sometimes forgot she was still his little girl, until she made pancakes. Jade always made them slightly burned on the edges, just the way she'd learned when she was 7. Some things didn't change. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Jade said, sliding a plate across the granite counter. "Every word, kiddo. You're telling me about your AP Lit essay on symbolism in The Great Gatsby." "I wasn't, but I will now," she said, grinning. "Mom texted. She's bringing my stepbrother over today. They want to use the pool." Marcus's expression didn't shift, but something tightened in his chest. The custody arrangement was still new, only 3 months since the divorce finalized. He'd gotten Jade every other weekend, which meant he'd gotten the house. And the pool, the one thing that had cost him nearly $60,000 to build 5 years ago, back when everything was different, back when Derek still lived here and called it our family's forever place. "That's fine," Marcus said, and he meant it. "The water temperature should be perfect right now. I had it serviced on Thursday." Jade smiled, that particular smile that contained both relief and concern. She didn't like when he said things too cheerfully. She could always tell when he was performing. The doorbell rang at 10:47 a.m., exactly 13 minutes before the agreed-upon time. Marcus was used to his ex-wife Victoria showing up early, showing up late, showing up at different times than planned. The divorce proceedings had revealed a lot about how Victoria operated in the world, with total disregard for boundaries, for timing, for anyone else's needs. But he'd agreed to this arrangement for Jade, so he opened the door with his pleasant face intact. Victoria stood on the porch in oversized sunglasses and a linen dress that cost more than his car payment. Behind her stood Derek, her new husband, looking approximately 14 years old despite being 42. And beside Derek sat a woman Marcus had never seen before. "Marcus, hello?" Victoria breezed past him without waiting for a greeting. "This is Simone, Derek's assistant. She's staying with us for the summer, helping with some projects. She's been dying to see the house and the pool, and we're heading out to brunch, so we thought we'd drop her here to cool off for an hour while we handle some things downtown." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry, Jade, and I weren't expecting." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," Simone interrupted, already moving past him into the foyer. She was tall, blonde, with the kind of sharp-edged beauty that suggested her face had been professionally redesigned at some point. She wore a designer swimsuit under a sheer cover-up, and her nails were the color of old blood. "This place is absolutely stunning. Victoria's told me everything about it." "Has she?" Marcus said flatly. "All the money you spent on it," Simone continued, moving toward the back of the house like she owned it. "The renovations, the pool, she said it's basically museum quality." Victoria's smile was tight. "You were always so proud of your purchases, Marcus." The venom in that single sentence, purchases instead of creations, investments, dreams, told him everything he needed to know about how she'd been characterizing him to her new circle. Not as a man who'd worked custom landscaping contracts for 3 years to afford this pool. As a materialistic guy who threw money at things. "The pool is just down the hall," Marcus heard himself saying, the polite version of himself now in complete control. "Jade will show you where to change. Guest bathroom, second door on the left. We have towels." "Perfect," Simone cooed. "Derek, honey, aren't you coming?" Derek glanced at Marcus apologetically. "I've got a call in 10. I'll just wait in the car. Victoria wants to grab dinner reservations." What Derek meant was, Victoria wanted him to disappear so she could maintain her pleasant demeanor while extracting whatever casual digs she'd scheduled into this visit. Marcus had become fluent in Victoria-speak during their 15-year marriage. By the time Victoria's Mercedes pulled away from the curb, yes, the silver S-Class that seemed to be an accessory piece of her rebrand, Marcus had settled into a beach chair on the far side of the pool while Jade showed Simone where everything was. He had his phone out, scrolling through nothing in particular, trying not to watch the way Simone moved through his space like she was filming a real estate video. Jade emerged from the house in her one-piece racing suit, the one that said "serious swimmer" in a way that made Marcus proud. She'd been on the varsity team since 9th grade. "Your pool is absolutely incredible," Simone called from the shallow end, where she was doing that thing where people who don't really swim wade while kicking their legs like they're in a children's program. "Did you really have it built from scratch?" "My dad designed it," Jade said, with a pride that caught Marcus off guard. She dove into the deep end, her form perfect, her body cutting through the water like something designed for it. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his contractor got the Johnson quote. They want the flagstone patio. Says it's better bones than the current setup. Your call. He was still staring at that message when he heard it. The sound of a car engine in the driveway. Not the street, the driveway. Marcus looked up. A silver Mercedes, nearly identical to the one Victoria had been driving, was backing toward the house at a slow, deliberate pace. But from his angle on the lounge chair, he couldn't see if it was actually Victoria or just a similar car. He sat up, Jade. His daughter was doing laps, headphones in, completely unaware. The car kept coming. Simone got out of the pool. Did someone come back? Marcus stood. The car was still moving and something about its trajectory seemed off. Not the careful precision of someone using the driveway, more like someone just pulling in. The car pulled up to the pool gate. The ornate iron gate Marcus had specially installed to separate the pool area from the rest of the yard, and stopped. From the driver's side, a woman stepped out. Not Victoria. Not anyone Marcus had ever seen. She was wearing a power suit despite it being a Saturday, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her face upward, her expression suggesting she'd just eaten something that tasted like regret. "This is the Chen residence?" she called out. "Yes," Marcus said slowly. "Can I help you?" The woman pulled out her phone, consulted it, and nodded. "Perfect. I'm Rhonda Kellerman. I'm here to view the property." Marcus felt his brain disconnect from reality for a moment. "I'm sorry." "The open house?" Rhonda said, in that tone reserved for explaining things to people she assumed were not intelligent. "Your real estate agent called my office this morning, said there'd be someone home to let me through the house and access the backyard. I'm a developer. I'm looking for properties in this neighborhood with land that has." She glanced at the pool and made a face like she was looking at a crime scene. "Existing water features, though frankly that pool is going to have to go. The space it takes up, combined with the square footage of this lot, means we could fit at least 3 luxury townhomes on the property. Maybe 4 if we get creative with the zoning." Marcus couldn't speak. He couldn't actually process words. "Your agent's name is Marcy Peterson. She said she'd texted you to confirm the appointment." "No text, no email, no notification of any kind." Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands and scrolled through his messages. There it was 20 minutes ago, buried under a work email and 2 texts from his contractor. A message from an unknown number. "Hi Marcus, Marcy Peterson with Sunrise Realty. Victoria mentioned your house might be heading to market. Got an interested buyer ready to tour. I'll swing by around 10:45 with a client. Thanks." He'd never listed his house with Sunrise Realty. He'd never told Victoria it was for sale. "I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said quietly. But Rhonda was already walking toward the pool gate. She tried it, found it locked, looked back at him with an expression that suggested she'd never encountered a locked gate before in her life. "I'm going to need to look at the footage of the renovation," she called. "Marcy mentioned the pool was only 5 years old. I need to see if the structural work was up to current standards. And that back corner," she pointed to where Jade was still doing laps, completely oblivious. "That's got to have foundation issues. You can see it from the slope of the yard." "The gate is locked for safety reasons," Marcus said. "My daughter is swimming." "Then I'll just take a walk around the perimeter," Rhonda said, already moving toward the side of the house. "I've seen enough anyway. This property is going to need a teardown. Maybe you'd get 2.5 for the lot if you're lucky. The market in this neighborhood is shifting toward developers. Single-family homes are becoming obsolete." He watched her disappear around the side of the house. Simone was standing in the shallow end, looking between Marcus and the direction Rhonda had gone. "What was that about?" "A mistake," Marcus said, but his voice sounded hollow. He pulled out his phone and called Victoria. She picked up on the 3rd ring, laughter in the background. "Marcus, if this is about Simone, she's perfectly safe. She's a trained swimmer and—" "Did you list my house for sale?" he asked quietly. The silence that followed told him everything. "I didn't list it," Victoria said carefully. "I simply mentioned to a real estate agent that you were exploring your options. She may have gotten ahead of things. I don't see why you're upset. Marcus, this could actually be good for you. A lot of money, a fresh start." "You can't list my house, Victoria. It's not your house. You signed the deed over as part of the settlement." "I know that," she said, and her voice had taken on that particular sharp edge that meant she was about to pretend she'd never done anything wrong. "I'm just saying that Derek and I know some very successful developers. If you're interested in cashing out, this could be lucrative. You could invest in something smaller, something more manageable." "The house isn't for sale, Victoria." "Yet," she said, and then more quietly, "Derek's been thinking about investing in this area. He thinks your lot would be perfect for a commercial venture. Restaurant, maybe, or a boutique hotel. He's willing to pay above market value if you're willing to work with us." Marcus hung up. He stood in his backyard, in the place he'd spent 3 years of his life building, where his daughter was swimming, where he'd planned to build a second story onto the pool house to create a guest cottage, where he'd imagined hosting graduations and weddings, and the kind of moments that defined a life. And he realized something with perfect clarity. Victoria wasn't trying to buy his house from him. She was trying to ruin it. Not out of greed, exactly. Out of spite. Out of the particular kind of malice that only an ex-spouse can manufacture. She'd wanted his devastation to match her own. She'd wanted him to lose something that mattered, the way she believed he'd made her lose things when the marriage ended. He was so caught up in this realization that he almost missed it when Rhonda Kellerman appeared back in his line of sight, walking directly toward the pool gate. She tried it again, found it locked, and then, with the casual confidence of someone used to getting her way, she reached into her designer bag and pulled out a key card. "Your agent said there might be an older gate lock," she called over. "I brought a universal override, works on 90% of residential pools in this area." She didn't ask permission. She simply inserted the card into the mechanism. The gate clicked open. Rhonda smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone about to walk through a door that didn't belong to her into a space that wasn't hers, to take measurements of something she intended to destroy. Something in Marcus's chest cracked. He watched Rhonda walk through that gate. His gate that he'd paid for, that had cost $1,200 and taken 3 months to order, and step onto the pool deck. Jade was still swimming, still didn't see her, still didn't know that the world was rearranging itself around her without her permission. "Excuse me," Marcus called out. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "You need to leave my property." Rhonda didn't even look at him. She was walking toward the water, taking photos with her phone, making notes, already mentally demolished his pool and replaced it with market-efficient development. And that's when Marcus understood with perfect crystalline clarity what he was about to do. He walked to his garage. He found the remote control for the automatic gate system he'd installed 2 years ago, the one that controlled the driveway gate, the one tied to the security system, the one he'd programmed to open and close on a timer during the winter months when he couldn't be bothered to go out in the snow. He looked at the Mercedes sitting in his driveway, still running, keys still in the ignition because people like Rhonda didn't worry about things like car thieves. She worried about market valuations and square footage and the crushing banality of what happened to beautiful things when people like her decided they weren't profitable. And he pressed the button. The car engine responded. The transmission shifted, and the Mercedes began to roll backward at a slow, deliberate pace, accelerating gently down the driveway, straight toward the deep end of the pool that Rhonda had just walked past. Rhonda turned at the sound. She saw the car moving. For one perfect moment, her face registered nothing but confusion. "What are you?" she started. The rear bumper hit the pool deck. The front end tipped. The Mercedes tilted at an angle as the back wheels went over the edge. For a second, the car hung suspended, half in the driveway, half over water. Then gravity won. The Mercedes dropped into the pool with a sound like the world ending. The water exploded upward, a geyser that soaked everyone in the immediate vicinity. The car sank, nose first, into the 12-foot deep end that Marcus had specially installed for exactly this reason. Because he wanted a pool that could accommodate diving, that had depth, that was built to Olympic standards, that was perfect in every measurable way. The Mercedes disappeared under the surface. Rhonda stood at the edge of the pool, completely soaked, her face transitioning through a series of emotions: confusion, rage, disbelief, and finally horror. Jade stopped swimming. Simone started screaming. And Marcus stood in his driveway, remote control still in his hand, and felt something that he would later realize was the exact moment he became someone new. Someone darker. Someone willing to destroy $10,000 worth of machinery to prove a point. The sound of the car hitting bottom, that deep, resonant thunk that vibrated through the pool structure, was the last peaceful moment Marcus Chen would have for the next 72 hours. What came next was chaos wearing different faces. Jade hauled herself out of the pool, water streaming off her racing suit, her expression cycling through shock to understanding to something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. She didn't say anything. She just walked over to Marcus, dripping, and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that day. It was the look of someone watching a parent become a stranger. "Dad," she said, her voice contained universes of disappointment. "What did you do?" "I'm not entirely sure," Marcus answered honestly. Simone was still screaming, though it had taken on a repetitive quality, like a car alarm that wouldn't shut off. She kept pointing at the pool, at the water that was now lapping gently over the Merced's submerged roof, at the reality that a car was genuinely, verifiably underwater. Rhonda Kellerman, soaking wet in a power suit that was probably Italian and definitely cost more than Marcus made in a month, stood with her mouth open in a way that suggested her brain was running damage calculations and finding the numbers too high to process. "You," she said finally, "you sank my car, you actually sank my car." "You trespassed on my property," Marcus said. The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by something colder. Something that felt less like rage and more like the clarity that comes after a point of no return. "Without permission, against my explicit instruction to leave." "You sank my car into a pool," Rhonda repeated, as if the words might make different sense the second time. "Do you understand what you've just done? That's a $140,000 vehicle. That's destruction of property. That's a felony. That's multiple felonies. You've just committed assault, destruction of property, vandalism, and—" "No one was in the car," Marcus interrupted calmly. "I made certain of that. The car was operated by remote control. No one was harmed. The vehicle is damaged, yes, but no one was harmed." He didn't mention that he'd actually pressed the button while watching Rhonda stand at the pool's edge, aware that she was in the car's trajectory, and had released the accelerator when he realized she was moving away. He didn't mention that his heart had stopped for a full second when he thought about what would have happened if she hadn't noticed the car's movement. He definitely didn't mention that the relief he felt when she wasn't hit was somehow worse than the rage that had preceded it. "I'm calling the police," Rhonda said, her voice shaking. She reached for her phone, then looked down at it, completely soaked, utterly ruined, and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I'm calling the police, and I'm calling my insurance company, and I'm calling my lawyer." "Please do," Marcus said, and he meant it, because the further he traveled down this particular road, the more inevitable it all seemed. The more like he'd been walking toward this moment his entire life, and was only now, at 38 years old, finally arriving. Inside, sirens. The sound of the world deciding that what had happened in his backyard was important enough to warrant official response. Someone, probably Simone, had called 911 while he was talking. Within 15 minutes, the street outside his house had become a carnival of flashing lights. Police cars. A fire truck, though what they were supposed to do with a submerged vehicle in a private pool, Marcus couldn't imagine. A tow truck. And eventually, detectives. Detective Sarah Whitmore was a woman who looked like she'd seen every version of human stupidity that the world had to offer. And this, a suburban dad who'd sunk a luxury car into his own pool to demonstrate a point, was somewhere in the middle of her spectrum. Not particularly original, not particularly violent, but definitely not small. "Walk me through it," she said, sitting across from him in his own living room, notepad in hand, her partner, Detective James Huang, standing by the window, watching the cleanup operations outside. "A woman named Rhonda Kellerman came to my property without permission," Marcus began. "She claimed to be a real estate developer viewing the property, though I hadn't authorized any viewing. She entered my property through a locked gate without permission. I asked her to leave. She refused. She began taking measurements of my pool with the apparent intent to document it for some kind of commercial project. I became angry. I operated my automated gate remote and caused a car in my driveway to roll backward into the pool. And the car belonged to Ms. Kellerman." "Yes." "And you operated it remotely." "Yes." "So you put it in reverse and drove it into the pool." "I pressed the button that caused the gate to open, which put the car in motion," Marcus said carefully. "It rolled downhill from there. Gravity did the rest." Detective Whitmore made a note. Ms. Kellerman is saying that you did this deliberately, with the intention of destroying her property as an act of revenge, because she was viewing your house for potential purchase. Potential development, Marcus corrected. She wasn't going to buy the house. She was going to demolish it. She told me she planned to destroy the pool and build townhouses on the lot. My ex-wife set up the viewing without my permission as part of what appears to be a coordinated effort to upset me. And that made you angry enough to sink a car. It wasn't a question. Whitmore didn't do questions when she already knew the answer. Yes, Marcus said. Do you own that remote control system legally? Yes, it's registered with the city. I have all the permits. Did you test it before today? Marcus thought about this. No, not extensively. So you didn't know for certain that pressing that button would result in the car moving. This was the trap. This was the moment where a smart lawyer would tell him to stop talking. But Marcus had already passed the point where self-preservation mattered. He destroyed Rhonda Kellerman's Mercedes with full knowledge of the consequences. He'd done it deliberately. He'd done it in front of 3 witnesses. He'd done it to prove a point. The only thing left now was honesty. I knew pressing the button would cause the car to move, Marcus said. I did press the button, fully aware of what would happen. I did so deliberately and with intent to destroy the vehicle. Detective Whitmore set down her pen. Marcus Chen, I'm going to need you to call a lawyer, right now, before we go any further with this conversation. I don't think I need a lawyer, Marcus said. I think I need to accept that I've done something I can't undo, and I need to figure out what that means for my daughter. He looked at where Jade was sitting in the kitchen, visible through the open doorway, at the kitchen table, not eating the sandwich Simone had made for her, Simone being that particular species of disaster that doesn't know when to leave and becomes oddly helpful in the face of crisis. Jade was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. What it means for your daughter, Detective Whitmore said slowly, is that her father is about to be charged with destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and possibly felony vandalism, depending on how generous the DA wants to be. It means she's going to watch you get arrested, possibly go to trial, possibly spend time in county or state custody. It means she gets to explain to her college applications why her primary residence has federal charges attached to it. Marcus felt that land in his chest. He'd been so focused on the moment of the car sinking that he hadn't actually followed the thread to the other side. I need a lawyer, he said. By Sunday morning, Marcus had acquired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Torres who apparently specialized in moments of passion that clients later regretted, and a criminal charge, felony destruction of property in excess of $5,000. The felony part mattered. It meant this wasn't vandalism. It meant he wasn't some angry teenager keying cars or spray-painting walls. It meant that what he'd done had crossed a legal threshold into serious crime. It also meant the media found it. By noon, there were satellite trucks outside his house. By 1 p.m., the story had migrated to every local news station with the headline, "Suburban Dad Drowns Car in Pool to Prove a Point." By 2 p.m., it had gone regional. By 5 p.m., someone had dredged up Victoria's Instagram account and made the connection between the newly divorced couple and the car in the pool, and the narrative had sharpened into something that played better on social media. Bitter divorce BECOMES felony destruction when ex-wife TRIES to sell his house. Victoria, for her part, released a statement through her lawyer claiming she'd been misunderstood, that she'd simply been trying to help Marcus explore his options, and that she was horrified and saddened by his violent overreaction. The statement included several phrases about seeking peace and healing that somehow made her sound like the victim. Rhonda Kellerman's insurance company announced they were launching an investigation and would not be paying out for malicious destruction of property. Rhonda herself hired a criminal lawyer and filed a restraining order against Marcus, which was granted, which meant he couldn't come within 300 feet of her business office, her residence, or any public place where she conducted business. Jade didn't speak to him for 2 full days. She'd go to her room, she'd go to school, she'd come home and go directly to her room. She wouldn't eat dinner with him. She wouldn't answer when he tried to talk to her. And on Tuesday evening, when Marcus knocked on her door and heard her say, "Come in," he found her sitting on her bed with her hands folded, waiting. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," Jade began, "and I can't think of anything that would make this okay. So I'm just going to ask you directly, why did you do it?" "Because I was angry," Marcus said. So was I, Jade said quietly. I was angry when Mom told me you two were getting divorced. I was angry when she started bringing Derek over. I was angry when the custody arrangement meant I had to split my time between two houses. But I didn't sink a car into my pool. I didn't commit a felony to make myself feel better. I know. Do you? Jade looked at him directly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just chose a car. A thing, dad, an object, over being present with me. That woman was here because of what Mom did, but you chose to let her ruin your day. You chose to let her make you so angry that you did something criminal. And now I'm the daughter of the guy who sank his car in his pool to prove a point, and that's the thing that's going to define how people see me for the rest of my high school experience. Jade, I'm not finished, she said, and her voice had taken on the cutting edge of someone half his age saying things that were more mature than anything he'd said in days. The worst part isn't even the felony or the news cameras or having to explain this to people. The worst part is that I thought you were the stable one. After the divorce, when everything was falling apart, I thought you were the one who had your act together. I thought if I stayed with you on weekends, I'd have somewhere safe. And now I'm not sure I know who you are. She was right. She was completely, thoroughly right, and no amount of self-justification would change that. I'm sorry, Marcus said. And he meant it with the kind of desperation that comes from realizing you've genuinely failed at the one thing that mattered more than anything else. I know, Jade said, but sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't make this better, and I don't know if I can forgive you for letting Mom get in your head like that. She turned away from him, and Marcus, understanding that he'd been dismissed, left her alone with whatever she was working through, knowing that he'd cracked something foundational in their relationship, and having absolutely no idea how to fix it. The real estate agent, Marcy Peterson, was more cooperative, though Marcus suspected that had less to do with her character and more to do with the fact that Victoria had clearly hung her out to dry. The first words out of Marcy's mouth, when Jennifer Torres arranged a statement, were she told me she was the legal owner of the property. Did you ask to see documentation? Jennifer asked, in her lawyer voice. That particular tone that makes it clear you're asking because you already know the answer and want the witness to understand that you know it. No, Marcy said quietly. She was very convincing. She said her ex-husband was open to selling, that he just needed the right buyer and the right price. She gave me the house address and code to the security gate. She gave you the security code? Jennifer interrupted. Yes, but I only shared it with Ms. Kellerman so she could view the property. I didn't know this would happen. What Marcy didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Victoria had stolen the security code years ago, had never erased it from her phone, and had used it to enable what was essentially a coordinated scheme to upset Marcus and, inadvertently, to turn her husband into a criminal. The prosecutors were divided on whether Victoria could be charged with anything. She hadn't destroyed property. She hadn't directly encouraged Rhonda to trespass. She'd simply mentioned that Marcus might want to sell his house and provided the security information that she'd forgotten wasn't technically hers to share. It was manipulative. It was cruel. It was arguably the worst thing she could have done, short of actual violence. But it probably wasn't illegal, which meant that the only person facing real consequences was Marcus. The trial was scheduled for September, 4 months away. Jennifer Torres spent hours with him in her office, asking him to walk through his state of mind, his intentions, his knowledge of the law regarding destruction of property, his understanding that he could have simply called the police and had Rhonda removed for trespassing. The thing you have going for you, Jennifer told him during one of these sessions, is that you didn't hit her. You didn't physically harm her in any way. You didn't destroy her property while threatening her or her life. The remote control element actually helps us because it shows premeditation, yes, but also that you made a deliberate choice not to injure the person. Does it matter? Marcus asked. It matters to a jury, Jennifer said. It might mean the difference between a felony conviction and a misdemeanor. It might mean the difference between jail time and probation. Depending on the judge, depending on how sympathetic they are to your story, it could matter a lot. What story? Marcus said bitterly. I sank a car into my pool because a woman was looking at my property and it made me angry. That's not a story, that's a fact. Your story, Jennifer said, is that you were the victim of coordinated harassment by your ex-wife, who was exploiting your love for your daughter and your attachment to your home to deliberately upset you. Your story is that you were pushed to an irrational moment by someone who understood exactly how to push your buttons and used that knowledge against you. Your story is that you're not actually a criminal. You're a man who made one catastrophic mistake in response to sustained emotional abuse. But that's not fair to Victoria, Marcus said slowly. Because what she did. She's not going to be held accountable for any of it. And I'm going to lose my house anyway, probably, because I can't afford the legal fees and the restitution. And Jade gets to grow up explaining all of this to every person she meets. No, Jennifer agreed. That's not fair, but fairness and the law aren't always the same thing. Fair would be Victoria losing custody. Fair would be Victoria getting charged with something. Fair would be you not having to pay a penny and keeping your house and your daughter just getting to be a normal teenager. But we don't get fair, we get court. He nodded, accepting this, because he'd already accepted that he'd moved himself across some invisible line, and whatever was on the other side of it was going to be much more complicated than whatever came before. What came before, as it turned out, was 2 more months of normalcy punctuated by disaster. Jade didn't speak to him more than necessary. He picked her up for his designated weekends, and she'd spend them in her room doing homework or video calls with her friends. She didn't use the pool. She didn't eat dinner with him. When she had to be around him, she was polite, which was somehow worse than if she'd been angry. The car remained in the pool. Marcus had contacted the insurance company, and they'd sent someone to assess the damage, total loss, and then nothing. The Mercedes became something of a local attraction, teenagers driving by his house to take photos, news helicopters occasionally circling to get aerial footage, the whole thing becoming increasingly surreal. He hired a pool cleaning company to figure out what to do about the submerged vehicle. They drained half the pool and were able to extract the Mercedes using heavy machinery and a series of cables, and they found that the interior was completely flooded, the electronics fried, the whole thing more or less destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. The cost to remove it, $8,000. The cost to repair the pool, $12,000. The mechanics of the submersion had damaged some of the filtration system and cracked the interior lining. The cost to his criminal defense, $70,000 and climbing. So he did something he'd never wanted to do. He took out a home equity loan against the house that he was probably going to lose anyway, and he paid for the removal of the car, the repair of the pool, and Jennifer Torr's continued employment. In early July, Rhonda Kellerman filed a civil suit for the full replacement value of her vehicle plus punitive damages, taking the criminal case beyond just prosecution and making it personal in a way that meant Marcus would probably lose money either way. If he was acquitted criminally, he'd still lose the civil case. If he was convicted, the civil case would be settled before trial. Either way, he was going to be paying Rhonda Kellerman for the next several years of his life. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Marcus realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Rhonda Kellerman wasn't actually the problem. Rhonda Kellerman was just a person trying to do her job, making business decisions in a legal way, following the information she'd been given by Marcy Peterson. She was annoying. She was condescending. She trespassed on his property and ignored his explicit instruction to leave. But she hadn't done anything that actually deserved a $140,000 car being sunk into a pool. The person who'd created this entire scenario was Victoria. The person who'd set all of this in motion, who'd used his love for his daughter as leverage, who'd deliberately manipulated him into a moment of rage that would define the next several years of his life. That was the person he should have been angry with. But Victoria was protected by the law in a way that made her essentially untouchable. All she'd done was share information and make suggestions. She hadn't committed a crime. And Marcus had committed a felony to prove a point to someone who'd only been there because Victoria had invited her. He was sitting on his porch on a Thursday night in July, 4 weeks before his trial, watching the pool that he'd painstakingly rebuilt operate at full capacity, empty of cars and full of chlorinated water, when his phone rang. It was Victoria. "I'm getting married," she said without preamble. "Derek proposed. We're planning a small ceremony in Cabo in December. I wanted Jade to hear it from me before she hears it from anyone else." Marcus felt something crystallize in his chest. Not rage, not sadness, just a kind of awful clarity. "You destroyed my life," he said quietly, "and you're calling me to tell me about your engagement." "I destroyed your life?" Victoria laughed, that particular laugh that she did when she thought someone else was being unreasonable. "Marcus, you're the one who put a car in a pool. You're the one facing criminal charges. That's not me. That's you and your inability to manage your emotions like an adult." He hung up, and he realized in that moment that she was right in a way she didn't even understand. He had put the car in the pool. He'd made that choice. He couldn't blame Victoria for his actions. He couldn't blame Rhonda. He couldn't blame anyone but himself. What he could do was make sure that his punishment fit what he'd actually done, and that Jade didn't get lost in the wreckage of his choices. He called Jennifer Torres. "I want to plead guilty," he said. "Not to destruction of property, but I want to take responsibility for what I did, honestly, in front of a judge, and ask for leniency based on the circumstances of my mental state at the time." "That's not typical strategy," Jennifer said carefully. "I know. The DA might not be open to it. Then we go to trial. But I'm not going to spend the next year lying about my state of mind or pretending I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. I did it anyway. I need to face that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," Jennifer said finally. "Let me talk to the DA. We can probably work something out." What happened next was that the DA, faced with a defendant willing to accept responsibility, offered a deal. Guilty plea to destruction of property in the second degree. A misdemeanor, supervised probation for 3 years, mandatory anger management classes, and restitution to Rhonda Kellerman in the amount of $130,000. No jail time, no felony conviction. Which meant Marcus would lose a lot of money and most of his dignity, but he wouldn't lose his future entirely. He wouldn't go to prison. He wouldn't become a registered criminal in the way that a felony conviction would make him. He'd just become the guy who sank a car in his pool, and he'd spend the next 3 years paying for it. The plea hearing was scheduled for August 15th. The night before, Marcus sat Jade down and explained to her what was happening, and why he was choosing to accept responsibility rather than fight. "It doesn't matter what Mom did," he told her. "It doesn't matter that she set me up. I made the choice to sink that car. I made it deliberately, and I need to face that choice honestly." Jade listened. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she asked, "Are you going to jail?" "Probably not." "Are you going to lose the house?" "I might lose it," he admitted. "The restitution alone is going to be $130,000. The legal fees are another $70,000. I might have to sell." Jade nodded slowly. "I'm glad you're being honest about it," she said, and then so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "I'm sorry Mom was awful to you." "I'm sorry I let her awfulness turn me into someone who would destroy property in anger," Marcus countered. "I'm sorry I gave her that power over me." "We're both sorry then," Jade said. "That's something." And it wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It wasn't even healing. But it was the smallest possible beginning to the work of making the wreckage into something that wasn't entirely destruction. The courtroom on August 15th was almost empty. These things usually were. Guilty pleas had none of the theater of trials. There were no spectators, no jury, just Marcus, Jennifer Torres, the assistant district attorney named Stephen Chen, no relation, Judge Patricia Martinez, and the court reporter clicking away on her stenotype machine like she was documenting something important. Rhonda Kellerman wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Her lawyer was, though, a severe woman named Elena Vasquez who'd made it clear that whether Marcus's conviction was a felony or misdemeanor, civil settlement was incoming. "Does the defendant understand the charges?" Judge Martinez asked. She was a woman in her 60s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of human regret. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said. He was wearing the suit that Jennifer had made him buy, charcoal gray, professional, the kind of thing that said, "I take this seriously," without saying, "Please take pity on me." "And you understand the plea agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor. Guilty plea to destruction of property in the second degree. Supervised probation for 3 years. Anger management classes. Restitution in the amount of $130,000. The state has agreed not to pursue felony charges." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Martinez looked over the paperwork. She read something that made her mouth compress into a thin line. When she looked back up at Marcus, her expression was entirely unreadable. "Tell me," she said, "in your own words why you did this." Jennifer had coached him on this. Don't make excuses. Don't blame Victoria. Don't blame Rhonda. Don't blame the system. Take responsibility. Show that you understand the gravity of your actions. Make clear that this was an aberration, not a pattern. I was angry, Marcus said. His voice was steady. He'd practiced this. My ex-wife had arranged for someone to view my house for potential purchase without my permission. When this person came to my property and refused to leave after I asked her to, I allowed that anger to override my judgment. I deliberately caused a vehicle to roll into my pool, destroying it completely. I did this knowing it would cause significant financial harm to the owner of the vehicle. I did it because I was momentarily unable to manage my emotions appropriately. That's on me. I'm responsible for that choice and its consequences. The judge made a note. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before I impose sentence? Just that I understand I'm going to spend the next 3 years paying for this, in money and in restitution work, and in the time commitment to the anger management program. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that this doesn't reflect who I want to be. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. The court notes that the defendant has accepted full responsibility and agreed to restitution without fighting the civil claims. This demonstrates some measure of growth and understanding. However, destruction of property, particularly property of this value, cannot be treated as a minor offense. The fact that the defendant had another legal option, calling the police to have the trespasser removed, makes this choice particularly concerning. She paused. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd had no idea what the judge would say, what she'd think, what sentence she'd impose. However, the judge continued, the court also notes that the defendant's anger, while unwise, was provoked by the coordinated actions of his ex-wife. The court is troubled by the apparent pattern of emotional manipulation. The court is also impressed by the defendant's decision to plead guilty rather than drag out proceedings. Another pause. I'm sentencing you to supervised probation for 3 years. You will attend mandatory anger management classes twice weekly for the first year, then weekly for the remaining 2 years. You will be responsible for full restitution to the vehicle owner in the amount of $130,000 to be paid through the probation department at a rate to be determined based on your income. You will also be responsible for paying $1,000 monthly to cover court costs and probation fees. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor. And do you agree to accept these terms? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court finds you guilty of destruction of property in the second degree and sentences you according to the terms outlined above. This hearing is concluded. And that was it. The most significant moment of Marcus's life, the moment that would define the next several years, took approximately 8 minutes. He walked out of the courthouse with Jennifer Torres, who was explaining something about the civil case and the possibility of settlement negotiation, but he wasn't really hearing it. He was thinking about the $13,000 annual obligation he'd just committed to. He was thinking about the fact that his house would likely be sold to cover costs. He was thinking about the apartment he'd have to live in during the probation period. He was thinking about the anger management classes, which sounded like a circle of people talking about their feelings, which sounded insufferable. But he was also thinking about Jade, and how she'd said, "I'm glad you're being honest about it," and how maybe, just maybe, this catastrophe could become something else if he worked at it hard enough. That evening he sat down with Jade again and explained what had happened. "No jail time?" she asked, and he could hear the relief in her voice. "No jail time, probation, classes, a lot of money to Ms. Kellerman, probably selling the house." Jade was quiet for a moment. "Where will you live?" "I'll find an apartment, something with enough room for you on weekends." "Dad," Jade said slowly, what if I asked to switch? Like, what if I asked Mom if I could stay with you on weekdays during the school year and with her on weekends? That way you'd at least have me most of the time and the apartment would feel like less of I don't know, a failure." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious," Jade said. "I'm not saying everything is okay, but I'm saying I don't want you to go through the next 3 years thinking I'm angry at you the whole time. I don't want you to lose me on top of everything else." He wanted to argue with her, to tell her that she shouldn't have to rearrange her life because of his choices. But he also knew that the best thing he could do was accept this gift, because that's what it was, an offer of forgiveness extended incrementally over time, contingent on his actually changing. "I'd like that very much," he said. "Okay," Jade said. "Then we'll ask Mom and we'll figure it out." And she hugged him, which was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily in 3 months. and Marcus realized that maybe the catastrophe wasn't going to destroy everything after all. Jade's mother predictably refused. "She's already established with her school," Victoria said over the phone, her voice taking on that particular tone it got when she was being unreasonable but wanted to sound reasonable. "She's settled with her friends. I'm not going to uproot her so she can babysit you while you figure out your life." "It's not babysitting," Marcus said. He was in his first anger management class, actually. One of his homework assignments was to practice assertive communication without aggression. It's her expressing a preference for how she wants to structure her time. "Jade doesn't know what she wants," Victoria said dismissively. "She's a teenager. She's probably just feeling sorry for you after what you did. When the novelty wears off, she'll be miserable living in an apartment instead of this house." "That's my daughter's choice to make," Marcus said. "Not yours, not mine, hers." There was a long silence. Then Victoria said, "I'm not changing the custody arrangement. If she wants to spend time with you, she can do it during her designated weekends. But I'm not letting you create an excuse to reduce my custody time because you had a temporary psychotic break." She hung up. Marcus was sitting in the anger management class, and he felt the familiar heat rising in his chest. The prelude to rage, the sense that Victoria had found yet another way to manipulate him, to take something he wanted and forbid it, to use Jade as leverage. And then he thought about what he was doing. He was sitting in an anger management class. His literal job right now was to learn how to not let moments like this turn into felonies. He raised his hand. The instructor, a therapist named Dr. Richard Martinez, also no relation to the judge as far as he could tell, looked at him. "I'm having a moment," Marcus said. "My ex-wife just denied my daughter's request to change custody arrangements, and I can feel myself getting angry about it. I'm having the thought that I should do something about it like I did with the car. And I want to acknowledge that that's a red flag, and I want to sit with it until the anger passes." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's excellent work, acknowledging the emotion and the impulse without acting on it. Tell us what you're feeling." "I'm feeling like I'm not allowed to have anything," Marcus said. "Like everything I own, everything I want is subject to her approval, and if I don't get it, I'm just supposed to accept it. I feel powerless, and I feel like the only way to get power back is to do something drastic." "But you're here," a woman in the corner said. Her name was Margaret, and she was attending the class because she destroyed her husband's motorcycle after he filed for divorce. "You could be doing something drastic, but you're not. You're sitting here talking about it. That's actually what power looks like." And she was right. The power wasn't in the destruction. The power was in the restraint, in the choice to sit with the feeling and let it pass instead of acting on it. "I think," Dr. Martinez said, "that this is a good moment to talk about the difference between reaction and response. A reaction is something you do in the moment without thinking. A response is something you do after considering your options. Sinking the car was a reaction. Sitting here and talking about your feelings instead of doing something destructive, that's a response." By the time the class ended, Marcus had calmed down enough to think clearly. The custody arrangement wasn't going to change. Victoria wasn't going to suddenly decide to allow Jade to live with him. But Jade could still request it, and she could still advocate for it, and there were probably legal ways to approach it if she was determined enough. The important thing was that he wasn't going to sink another car to make the point. He was going to live with the powerlessness, acknowledge it, and figure out how to work within the constraints of reality instead of destroying things, because reality didn't match his preferences. The house sold in October. The real estate market had softened slightly, and Marcus had to drop the price by $30,000 to move it, but it sold. The proceeds, after realtor fees and the mortgage payoff, came to approximately $240,000. From that, he paid $130,000 to Rhonda Kellerman, closing her civil case and his liability. He paid the remaining $70,000 in legal fees and court costs. He paid $12,000 for the pool repairs. And he was left with roughly $28,000, which he used for a down payment on a small house in a less desirable neighborhood. Smaller, older, but with good bones and a driveway that could theoretically fit a car, though he'd never put one there again if he could help it. The move was melancholy. Jade helped him pack up the house that she'd grown up in, that had been his dream for so long. They found old photos in boxes, Pictures of the pool being constructed, of birthday parties, of the summer the whole family had spent there before the divorce became inevitable. "Do you think you'll ever want this back?" Jade asked, holding a photo of the pool in its first year, pristine and uncontaminated by metaphor. "No," Marcus said, and it was true. The pool represented a version of his life that had been predicated on the assumption that things would stay the same. His marriage would last, his family would be intact, his choices would only affect him. "What about the Mercedes?" Jade asked, grinning slightly. "You ever think about replacing it?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that I'm going to need a long time before I'm comfortable around expensive cars. Some kind of psychological block that prevents me from ever driving a luxury vehicle." "Good," Jade said, "because I feel like that would be very ironic." By Thanksgiving, Marcus was settled into his new house. It was a 3-bedroom ranch built in 1987 with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed work. He'd never be able to put in another pool. The backyard was small, sloped awkwardly, and backed up against a commercial property. He couldn't have designed something more different from his previous vision if he'd tried. But it had enough room for Jade's bedroom during her scheduled visitation, and a living room where they could sit together. And most importantly, it was affordable enough that he could actually pay his restitution and probation fees without going into debt. He'd started his own landscaping business, smaller than the custom contracts he'd worked before, more residential, less ambitious. The anger management classes were helping. He'd stopped expecting people to behave rationally and started accepting that Victoria was going to do what Victoria did, and that Jade was going to navigate her own relationship with her mother regardless of what he wanted for her. And he'd started dating again, cautiously, a woman named Catherine who worked at a nonprofit and had her own complicated divorce story. On Christmas Eve, Jade came to his new house for their designated weekend. They made dinner together, not his parents' recipe, not Victoria's recipe, but something they invented as they went, combining elements from both, creating something entirely new. And after dinner, sitting on his old couch in his new living room, Jade said, "I want you to know that I'm not angry at you anymore. I was for a while, but I'm not. I think what you did was stupid, but I also understand why you did it. And I think you're actually trying to be better, and that matters." "Thank you," Marcus said. "That might be the thing I needed to hear most." "Also," Jade continued, "I'm going to keep asking Mom to change the custody arrangement. Not because I'm trying to make her life hard, but because I want it to be my choice where I live. And I'm going to keep documenting the times she refuses, and when I'm 18, if I want to switch my residence to you permanently, I'm going to. So you should know that's coming." "I appreciate the heads up." Also," Jade said, "I'm applying to colleges far away from here. I'm applying to schools on the East Coast. Yale, Princeton, Northeastern. I'm trying to get out and see the world instead of staying here where all the family drama is." "That's good," Marcus said. He meant it, even though it meant his daughter was going to leave. "You should see the world. You should go somewhere that doesn't have all of this baggage." "I'll come home for breaks," Jade promised. "And I'm going to stay in touch. But I think I need to be somewhere where people don't know my dad as that guy who sank his car in his pool." "That seems fair," Marcus said. She got into Princeton, eventually early decision, with a scholarship that covered most of the costs. She moved to New Jersey, and she came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and she called every Sunday. And slowly, over the course of the next 4 years, the family catastrophe became just a story, something that had happened, something that had shaped them, but not the thing that defined their relationship. "Honestly," Marcus said, "I'm feeling lighter. I finished my probation. I've paid off the restitution. The last payment went through 2 weeks ago. I don't have to think about Rhonda Kellerman or the Mercedes anymore. The criminal thing is behind me, and I'm working. I'm seeing Catherine steadily. My daughter and I have rebuilt our relationship, and I'm not angry all the time anymore." "Can you articulate what changed?" Dr. Martinez asked. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "the thing I learned through all of this is that my anger was never really about Rhonda Kellerman or even about the Mercedes or even about Victoria. It was about my sense that things should be a certain way, and when they weren't, I felt entitled to destroy them. And I had to learn that the world doesn't operate based on what I think should happen. The world operates based on what does happen, and my job is to figure out how to exist in that reality without lashing out." "And have you done that?" "I'm working on it," Marcus said. "Some days are better than others, but I've made it 3 years without sinking another car into a pool, so I'm going to call that success." Dr. Martinez laughed. I think that's a reasonable benchmark. When Marcus left the office, he felt like something had finally fully closed. He wasn't the guy who'd sunk the car anymore. He was the guy who'd sunk the car and then spent years putting his life back together. It was a different story. It had a trajectory. It had growth. He drove to Jade's high school graduation, where she gave a speech about learning from your parents' mistakes and building your own life instead of repeating theirs. She didn't mention the car or the pool or any of the specific details, but everyone in the audience who knew her family understood exactly what she was talking about. Afterward, at the reception, Jade's friends came up to him and told him how proud they were of her. Not of his parenting, exactly, but of his willingness to acknowledge his failures and work to correct them. It was a strange kind of redemption, not forgiveness, but recognition that he'd done the work. Victoria ignored him, which was fine. But when he was leaving, Derek pulled him aside. I wanted to tell you something, Derek said quietly. Victoria's been asking me to do things to mess with you. Legal things, technically, but things that are designed to make your life harder. I'm not doing them. I don't want to be part of whatever dynamic you two have. So I wanted you to know that if something comes up that seems like her, it might actually be her. Thank you for telling me, Marcus said. Also, Derek continued, I think you handled the whole car thing better than I could have. Not the sinking it part, but the facing the consequences part. I don't know if I could do that. When Jade left for Princeton, Marcus drove her to the airport and helped her check her bags. And he cried a little bit, watching her walk toward security because she was leaving him behind. But she was doing it with confidence, with a sense of purpose, with the kind of forward momentum that suggested she was going to be fine. She turned back before she went through security, waved, and then disappeared. And Marcus realized that the pool, in the end, hadn't destroyed his relationship with his daughter. It had just accelerated something that was already in motion, the natural separation that happens when a kid becomes an adult and has to figure out who they are independent of their parents. That summer, Marcus received a letter from Rhonda Kellerman. He almost didn't open it, but he did. Mr. Chen, I've been thinking about what happened 3 years ago, and I realized I never actually said anything about my side of it. Not in court, not to your lawyer, nowhere. I just let the insurance company and my lawyer handle it while I pretended I was the victim. The truth is, I was trespassing. I knew I shouldn't be there without explicit permission, and I went in anyway because I thought I was entitled to. Because I'm used to being able to go anywhere, see anything, buy anything, and I'd never really had consequences for that before. When your car sank into the pool, my first reaction was rage. But my second reaction, once I had time to think about it, was actually relief. Because it meant I couldn't just keep operating the same way without anyone ever pushing back. I paid cash for the car, by the way. I didn't need the settlement money. I'm sending it to the bank account you provided to the court, so you're basically getting half of what you thought you owed. My insurance company is suing me for breach of contract because they found out I paid in cash, but that's my problem, not yours. You made a bad choice. I made a bad choice. We both paid for it. I think that's actually fair. Consider us even. Rhonda Kellerman. Marcus read the letter 5 times, and he never quite understood whether Rhonda was being sincere or whether she was just being cryptic in the way that wealthy people sometimes are when they're trying to seem deep. But he kept the letter. He kept it because it represented a kind of closure, not the legal kind which had come from the court, but the human kind, which comes from mutual acknowledgement that everyone involved had made mistakes. He sent her a note back. Thank you. I'm sorry I destroyed your car. I was wrong and I'm trying to be better. She never replied, but he didn't expect her to. By the time Jade graduated from Princeton, Marcus had been promoted to manager at his landscaping company. He was making good money again, not as much as he'd made before, but enough. He'd paid off the house. He and Catherine had talked about marriage, though they weren't in any rush. He'd rebuilt the life that he'd thought was destroyed, and it turned out to be pretty similar to the one he'd had before, just with more realistic expectations and less expensive recreational vehicles. Victoria, for her part, had divorced Derek and was now with someone new. Jade had become the kind of adult who could interact with both her parents without it being a whole thing. She'd come to his house and her mother's house, and she didn't use him as a way to hurt Victoria or vice versa. The pool, the original pool, had eventually been replaced by townhouses just like Rhonda had predicted. Marcus sometimes drove past the neighborhood and saw the development, and he felt nothing in particular. The pool was just a thing that had existed, and then it didn't, and that was fine. On the 10th anniversary of the car sinking, a local news station did a retrospective story. Whatever happened to the pool guy? They interviewed Marcus, and he talked about the anger management classes, about facing consequences, about learning to let go of the need to control things. He talked about how Jade had turned out fine, actually better than fine, because she'd learned from watching him fail and recover. He didn't make excuses for what he'd done. He didn't blame Victoria or Rhonda or anyone else. He just said, "I was angry. I did something destructive. I spent the next several years paying for it, literally and figuratively, and I'm grateful that I got the opportunity to make something better out of the wreckage." The story played on the local news for a day, and then it didn't, and then it became one of those things that people in the city remembered vaguely. Oh yeah, that guy who drove his car into his pool during a divorce, and then eventually forgot about. But Jade watched the story, and she called him afterward. "I'm proud of you," she said, "not for sinking the car, but for what you did after." In the 11th year, something unexpected happened. A documentary production company called Marcus, asking if he'd be interested in being the subject of a longer-form documentary about the incident. "Why would you want to do that?" Catherine asked when he told her. "I have no idea," Marcus said, "but I think I'm going to do it. I think it's time to tell the whole story, not just the parts that make me look good or bad, the whole thing." The documentary took 2 years to make. The filmmakers interviewed Jade, Catherine, Dr. Martinez, Jennifer Torres, even Rhonda Kellerman, who agreed to participate on the condition that she could tell her side of the story. What emerged was a portrait of a moment, a specific time and place where a man's life intersected with a woman's ambition and an ex-wife's malice, and everything collapsed in spectacular fashion. But it was also a portrait of what comes after, of how you rebuild, of how you learn to take responsibility, not just for the thing you did, but for all the ways that thing rippled outward and affected other people. The documentary premiered at a film festival, and it got good reviews. Critics called it a searing examination of masculinity, rage, and redemption in contemporary America, which wasn't really what it was, but Marcus didn't argue. What surprised him was that the documentary reached Victoria. He'd been told by the filmmakers that they'd reached out to her for interview, and she'd declined. But she watched it anyway, apparently, because he got a call from her lawyer saying that Victoria wanted to discuss, addressing the narrative presented in the film. Marcus declined to meet with her. He'd spent enough time managing Victoria's emotions. He wasn't going to do it anymore. But Jade called him the day after she watched the documentary. "Mom cried," Jade said. "I've never seen her actually cry about the divorce or anything related to it. She watched the documentary, and when you talked about how she'd orchestrated the whole thing, she started crying." "That's good," Marcus said, not unkindly. "I think she needed to understand the impact of her actions." "She asked me if I thought you were angry at her," Jade said. "Am I?" Marcus asked himself the question honestly. "No, I don't think I am. I think I was for a long time, but anger is exhausting and I'm tired of being angry. Your mom did things that were designed to hurt me, and they did. But they also shaped me into someone better. I'd take that trade." "She said she was sorry," Jade said. "I'm glad she said that," Marcus said. "And I hope she meant it, but her apology doesn't actually change anything. What matters now is that we both move on and stop trying to hurt each other through our daughter." The documentary had another unexpected side effect. It made Marcus something of a minor celebrity. He'd get recognized sometimes at the grocery store. People would reference the car or the pool. There was a brief moment where the story became a meme, images of the Merced sinking with various captions, and Marcus decided the internet was a nightmare that he was grateful to be too old to fully participate in. But he also got messages from people who'd watched the documentary and seen themselves in it. People who'd done terrible things in moments of rage and were trying to figure out how to rebuild. He started a small support group, meeting every other week with people who were working through the aftermath of their own catastrophes. It wasn't anger management. That was what Dr. Martinez had provided. This was something different. This was people sitting in a circle, telling the truth about what they'd done and supporting each other's efforts to become better versions of themselves. Catherine and Marcus got married on a beach in Northern California 5 years after the documentary premiered. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Jade was there. Victoria and Derek's new wife were conspicuously absent. Rhonda Kellerman sent a gift, a piece of modern art made from recycled metal, which seemed intentionally ironic, and Marcus appreciated it. During the reception, Jade gave a toast. "My dad did something stupid 11 years ago," she said. "He was angry, and instead of dealing with his anger like a functional adult, he sank a car into a swimming pool. And then he spent the next 11 years being better. Not fixing what he'd done. You can't really fix destroying a car, but becoming someone who wouldn't do that anymore. And I think that's actually the definition of redemption. Not never making mistakes, but making the commitment to not repeat them." She raised her glass. "To Dad and to Catherine, and to making better choices going forward." Later, when they were slow dancing to some song Catherine had chosen, Marcus asked her, "Do you ever regret it? Getting involved with the guy who sank a car into his pool?" "Do you ever regret sinking the car?" Catherine asked back. "I regret the immediate action," Marcus said, "but I don't regret the person it forced me to become. If I hadn't sunk that car, I'd probably still be married to Victoria, or I'd be with someone worse, or I'd be alone and angry for the rest of my life." "Then no," Catherine said. "I don't regret it, because you're exactly the person I want to be with, and I didn't get you by accident. I got you because you did something catastrophic and then spent 11 years proving that you weren't the person who did that thing anymore." Marcus thought about this. He thought about the car sinking slowly into the pool. He thought about Rhonda Kellerman's face in that moment of shock. He thought about his daughter watching from the pool. He thought about Victoria orchestrating all of it from a distance. And he realized that the car in the pool was the moment his life cracked open. It was terrible and destructive and stupid. But it was also the moment that forced him to examine himself, to acknowledge his anger, to take responsibility, and to build something better from the wreckage. He wouldn't recommend it as a life strategy, but he also couldn't regret it because it had led him here. "I love you," he said to Catherine. "I know," she said. "That's why I married you." On the 15th anniversary of the incident, a reporter from a major magazine reached out, asking to do a follow-up story about where Marcus was now. The story, when it came out, was titled, "The Man Who Sank His Car Finally Forgives Himself." And Marcus realized, reading it, that it was true. He had forgiven himself. Not because he'd forgotten what he'd done, not because the consequences had gone away, but because he'd worked so hard to be different, to be better, to take responsibility and rebuild, that the thing he'd done no longer defined him. It was just something he'd done once in a moment of rage, which he would spend the rest of his life being better than. The pool was long gone, demolished to make way for townhouses. The Mercedes was a memory. Victoria had moved on with her life, and so had Marcus. Jade was thriving in her career. Catherine was his wife. And Marcus Chen, the guy who'd sunk a car into a pool because he was angry at his ex-wife, was finally just Marcus Chen. A man who'd made terrible choices and then spent years making better ones.